The lawyer cleared his throat and looked directly at me across the mahogany table. I'm sorry, Sarah. According to your mother's final will and testament, dated March 15, 2023, you have been completely removed as a beneficiary. The entire estate, the house, the savings, the life insurance, everything goes to your brother Michael. I felt the air leave my lungs. 43 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office, learning that the woman who raised me, who I'd spent the last 18 months caring for through pancreatic cancer, had decided I deserved nothing. Michael leaned back in his chair with a satisfaction that didn't even try to hide itself. He'd won. But what that lawyer found hidden in Mom's papers 3 weeks later made a judge go completely silent in open court. And Michael? Well, let's just say karma has perfect timing. Welcome to Family Reckoning. I'm sharing this story because somewhere out there, someone else is being gaslit by a sibling who thinks manipulation is inheritance strategy. Drop your state or country in the comments below. I want to know where my family is watching from. Also, please note this story contains fictionalized elements for dramatic and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people is coincidental, but the lessons, those are real. The smell never leaves you. That particular combination of antiseptic and approaching death that clings to hospital rooms and follows you home in your clothes, under your fingernails, in the spaces between your thoughts where you try not to think about what's coming. I had been smelling it for 18 months. Mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on a Tuesday in September 2022. Stage 4. The oncologist, Dr. Martinez, explained it with the careful gentleness of someone who delivers impossible news regularly. 6 to 12 months, maybe 18 if we were lucky and the treatment took hold. We weren't lucky. I moved back to Millfield that same week. Took a leave of absence from my marketing job in Columbus, sublet my apartment, and set up a cot in Mom's living room because the stairs to my old bedroom had become impossible for her. Michael, my older brother, lived 23 minutes away in the next town over. He had opinions about my decision. "You're being dramatic, Sarah," he said, standing in Mom's kitchen that first weekend. His arms crossed in the way they'd been crossed since we were kids when he wanted to establish his authority. "She's got home health nurses. She's got neighbors. You don't need to put your whole life on hold." Michael was 46, 3 years older, and had spent those 3 years perfecting the art of being right about everything while contributing nothing. He worked in commercial real estate, drove a leased BMW, and had developed the particular kind of confidence that comes from never having to clean up your own messes because someone else always steps in first. "Mom needs family around," I said, not looking up from the pill organizer I was filling. 7 different medications, 3 times a day, each one fighting a battle we were slowly losing. "Family?" Michael repeated, and there was something in his tone that should have warned me, right? "Well, some of us have responsibilities beyond playing nursemaid." I looked at him then, really looked. He was wearing a suit on a Saturday morning, checking his phone every 30 seconds, treating Mom's diagnosis like an inconvenience to his schedule rather than the central fact around which everything else would now revolve. "This isn't playing," I said quietly. "This is caring for the woman who raised us." Michael's expression shifted slightly, not to agreement but to calculation. The look he got when he was measuring angles, figuring out how to position himself advantageously in a situation he hadn't created but intended to control. "Of course," he said, "we all care about Mom. But Sarah, you need to think practically. What happens to your career? Your apartment? You can't just abandon your life indefinitely." What I didn't understand then was that Michael had already made a decision about indefinitely. He'd looked at the timeline Dr. Martinez had given us and done the math. 18 months of me being the primary caregiver meant 18 months of him being free to become the favored son in our mother's final chapter. While I dealt with medications and doctor appointments and the daily reality of watching someone you love diminish, he would swoop in for brief, dramatic visits. The hero who didn't have to clean the bedpan. The strategy worked better than I could have imagined. Mom had always been sharp. Margaret Flynn, 74 years old, retired high school English teacher, crossword puzzle champion, and the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday without writing them down. But cancer doesn't just eat your body. The medications fog your thinking. The pain fractures your attention. And fear, the constant, underlying fear of what's coming, makes you grasp for certainties wherever you can find them. Michael understood this instinctively, where I offered practical help, driving to appointments, managing prescriptions, being present for the daily grind of illness. He offered reassurance about the big picture. He became her emotional anchor while I became her medical manager. And slowly, subtly, he began positioning those two roles as fundamentally different in value. Sarah's been such a help with the day-to-day stuff, he would say during his Sunday visits, settling into Dad's old recliner with coffee and the newspaper spread across his lap. But I worry she's burning herself out. This isn't sustainable long-term. He'd say this while I was in the kitchen preparing Mom's lunch, timing medications, or on the phone with insurance companies fighting coverage denials. Close enough to hear, but positioned as a private conversation with Mom, as though he was protecting her from my supposed martyrdom. I've been thinking, he'd continue, about what happens when this gets more intensive, when you need round-the-clock care. Sarah can't provide that. She doesn't have the training. But there are excellent facilities, places where you'd get professional attention. Mom would shift uncomfortably in her chair. The idea of leaving her home, the house she and Dad had bought in 1978 and where she'd planned to live out her days, was terrifying to her. Michael knew this. That was exactly why he kept bringing it up. Michael thinks I should consider Sunset Manor, she told me one afternoon in December. We were sitting in the living room, her in the recliner, me on the couch with a stack of medical bills I was organizing for insurance submissions. What do you think? I asked, though my stomach had already dropped. Sunset Manor was the upscale assisted living facility on the other side of town. Private rooms started at $4,800 a month. I don't want to leave, she said quietly. But Michael says I'm being unrealistic, that I'm putting too much burden on you. I set down the bills. Mom, you're not a burden. This is where you want to be. This is where Dad's memory is. Why would we change that unless we had to? But the seed had been planted. Michael had begun the careful work of positioning himself as the rational son who cared about Mom's long-term welfare, while I was the emotional daughter who couldn't see past my own need to feel useful. It was subtle, brilliant, and completely effective. By January, the conversations had evolved. Michael began bringing financial planning into his visits. I've been reviewing your portfolio with my guy at Morgan Stanley, he told Mom during a particularly difficult week when her pain levels had spiked and she was barely eating. There are some strategies we should consider for tax optimization. Estate planning stuff. Boring but important. Mom nodded weakly. She trusted Michael's financial expertise the same way she trusted my caregiving. Division of labor. What she didn't see was how that trust was being weaponized. The thing is, Michael continued, glancing at me in a way that wasn't quite inclusive, these conversations need to happen between you and me. Financial planning is complicated and some of the strategies, well, they're not really Sarah's area. I was folding laundry in the corner of the room. Mom's clothes had become almost childlike in their simplicity, soft shirts, elastic waist pants, everything chosen for easy changing when basic tasks became monumental. I'd been handling her finances for 6 months, learning about Medicare supplements and prescription coverage and the brutal arithmetic of dying in America. I can step out, I said, because that seemed like what was being asked. No need, Michael said smoothly. I just mean the technical stuff, investment terms, tax implications. Sarah's got enough on her plate without worrying about municipal bond allocations. The dismissal was gentle but complete. I was being categorized as someone who couldn't understand complex financial matters, someone whose brain was too occupied with practical caregiving to handle strategic thinking. It was a characterization that would prove disastrous. The lies started small. Things I couldn't easily verify because I was managing Mom's immediate needs rather than monitoring Michael's private conversations with her. I talked to Dr. Martinez yesterday, he told Mom during a February visit. He said you're responding better to the treatment than expected. Your numbers are actually improving. This was not true. I'd been to the appointment with Dr. Martinez 3 days earlier. Mom's CA19 to 9 levels, the protein marker they used to track pancreatic cancer, had risen again. The treatment was slowing the progression but not stopping it. Dr. Martinez had been clear about our timeline, gentle but unflinching. We were entering what he called the final phase. But Mom's face lit up when Michael said it. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely hopeful. He really said that? She asked. Absolutely. He pulled me aside and said you're one of his success stories. Sarah probably didn't mention it because she doesn't want to get your hopes up, but I thought you deserved to know. I was making tea in the kitchen, close enough to hear every word. The careful way he'd positioned my absence from this fictional conversation as protectiveness rather than dishonesty. How he'd made my actual attendance at the real appointment irrelevant because his version was better. I came back with the tea, set Mom's cup on the table beside her chair, and caught Michael's eye. He held my gaze steadily, without guilt or apology. He was daring me to contradict him in front of our dying mother. I said nothing. That was my first mistake. The lies grew bigger, more elaborate, more damaging. Michael told Mom that I'd complained to him about the financial burden of staying home from work. He said I'd asked him whether she had enough life insurance to cover my lost income. He told her that Dr. Martinez had privately expressed concerns about the quality of her home care. Too much emotional involvement, not enough professional distance. None of it was true. All of it was believable. And when Mom was weak and frightened and confused by medications, believable was the same as true. By March, our roles had completely reversed. I was still handling every aspect of Mom's daily care, but Michael had become her primary emotional confidant. She would save questions for his visits, issues she felt were too important to bother me with since I was already doing so much. He had positioned himself as her advocate, her protector, the son who could see clearly while everyone else was too close to the situation. Michael thinks we should look into hospice, Mom told me on a Thursday morning in late March. She was having a good day, which made the conversation harder somehow. Clear but devastating. Hospice. I set down the magazine I'd been pretending to read. Mom, hospice is for when we're not fighting anymore. Michael explained it to me, she said, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when she thought I was missing something obvious. It's not giving up. It's about quality of life. About being comfortable at home instead of constantly running to treatments that aren't really helping. This was the most manipulative thing Michael had done yet. Hospice was absolutely the right choice. I'd been researching it for weeks, trying to find the courage to bring it up. But by presenting it as his idea, his wisdom, his gift to Mom, he was positioning himself as the son who could make the hard decisions while I was too emotional to see what was best for her. If that's what you want, I said carefully, I'll support whatever makes you most comfortable. Michael said you'd say that, Mom replied. He said you'd be relieved because it would take some of the pressure off you. I stared at her. Michael had predicted my response and pre-interpreted it for her. Even my agreement was being filtered through his narrative about my motivations. Mom, I said, is there something you need to ask me? Something you want to know about how I feel or what I think? She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Doubt maybe, or recognition of a dynamic she couldn't quite name but could feel. I just want what's best for everyone, she said finally. Michael had made sure she believed what was best for everyone was what was best for Michael. The will reading was scheduled for a Tuesday in May, 3 weeks after Mom's funeral. I'd spent those weeks in a kind of suspended animation, staying in Mom's house because I couldn't bear to leave yet but knowing I'd have to eventually. The grief was complicated. Not just for Mom, but for the relationship between us that had somehow become strained and distant in her final months without my understanding exactly how or why. Michael had been solicitous after the funeral, playing the role of protective older brother with the same skill he'd used to play favored son. He'd handled the obituary, the arrangements, the thank you notes to people who'd sent flowers. He'd insisted I shouldn't worry about practical matters while I was grieving. I'll take care of the estate stuff, he'd said, his hand on my shoulder as mourners left the graveside service. You've done enough. Let me handle the paperwork from here. I've been grateful. I was exhausted from 18 months of caregiving, hollowed out by loss, and the idea of navigating probate and estate administration felt overwhelming. Michael's offer to manage it seemed generous. It wasn't generous. It was strategic. Robert Hendricks had been Mom's attorney for 12 years. He'd handled the simple will she'd made after Dad died, updated her power of attorney documents, and helped her with a few property matters over the years. He was in his 60s, methodical and kind in the careful way of lawyers who deal regularly with families in crisis. I've asked you both here today for the reading of your mother's final will and testament, he said, settling behind his desk with a folder I recognized. Mom had mentioned updating her will in February, during one of her better weeks. She'd said it was routine maintenance, making sure everything was current. Michael sat beside me in the leather chair, checking his phone in the casual way of someone who wasn't particularly worried about the outcome. He'd been Mom's primary emotional support in her final months. He'd made the hard decisions about hospice and funeral arrangements. Of course, he'd be the primary beneficiary. The only question was how much I'd receive as the secondary beneficiary. Mr. Hendricks opened the folder and began reading. I, Margaret Flynn, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils and declare this to be my final will and testament. Standard language. He continued through the technical sections. Appointment of executor, Michael. Directions for funeral arrangements, already followed. Payment of debts and taxes, straightforward. Then he reached the distribution of assets. To my son Michael Flynn, I leave my gratitude for his guidance in my final months, and his clear thinking about my care when others couldn't see past their own needs. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't standard will language. This was personal and pointed. To my son Michael Flynn, I bequeath my entire estate, including but not limited to my house and property at 47 Maple Street, Millfield. All bank accounts, investment accounts, and financial assets. My life insurance policy with Great Lakes Mutual. All personal property, household items and possessions, and any other assets I may own at the time of my death. The room was completely quiet. Mr. Hendricks looked up from the document. His expression carefully neutral, but his discomfort visible. To my daughter Sarah Flynn, I leave nothing, as she has already received more than her share through her choice to abandon her responsibilities and career to play caretaker. A decision that was motivated by guilt rather than love, and that placed an unfair emotional burden on her brother, who was forced to make difficult decisions while she focused on day-to-day tasks that any professional could have handled more competently. Couldn't breathe. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just the disinheritance but the cruelty of the language. This wasn't the voice of the mother who'd raised me. This was someone else's interpretation of our relationship. Someone else's narrative about my motives and Michael's heroism. I looked at Michael. He was nodding slightly, as though this was exactly what he'd expected. Exactly what was fair. I'm sorry, Sarah, Mr. Hendricks said quietly. I know this must be difficult to hear. Michael reached over and put his hand on my arm, a gesture that would have looked supportive to anyone watching. Sarah, he said, his voice full of manufactured sympathy. I had no idea Mom felt this way, but you have to understand, she saw everything. She knew you'd been struggling with resentment about putting your life on hold. She didn't want you to feel obligated anymore. The performance was flawless. He was simultaneously expressing surprise and explaining why the will made sense, comforting me while justifying my complete exclusion. I stood up from the chair because sitting felt impossible. Mr. Hendricks, I said, can I see that will? He slid the document across the desk. I read through it carefully, looking for something, anything, that resembled my mother's voice. The technical language was standard, but the personal sections, the explanations for her decisions, felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. When was this signed? I asked. March 15, 2023, Mr. Hendricks replied. About 6 weeks before your mother passed. March 15th. I remembered that day. Mom had been having severe pain, barely conscious except for brief periods when the medication wore off enough for her to be alert but miserable. I'd spent the morning on the phone with hospice, trying to adjust her pain management protocol. Mr. Hendricks, I said carefully, was my mother alone when she signed this? No, she had a witness present. Your brother Michael. He'd brought her to the office for the appointment. Michael had brought her. On a day when she could barely stay awake, he'd driven her to a lawyer's office to sign a will that disinherited the daughter who'd been caring for her and gave everything to the son who'd made weekend visits. Sarah, Michael said, standing as well. I know you're upset, but Mom was clear about what she wanted. She asked me to bring her that day specifically because she wanted to handle this while she was still able to think clearly. Think clearly. On a day when she'd been so heavily medicated I'd wondered if she'd remember my name. I set the will back on Mr. Hendricks's desk. I need some air, I said, and walked out of the office. Michael followed me into the parking lot. Sarah, I'm sorry it happened this way, he said, but you have to understand. Mom saw how much this was costing you. Emotionally, financially. She didn't want you tied to her house and her debts. She thought this would free you to rebuild your life. I turned to face him. Michael. She was barely conscious on March 15th. She had good moments, he said quickly. Clear moments. This was one of them. When did you first suggest she change her will? The question caught him off guard. For just a second, his practiced composure slipped. "I didn't suggest anything," he said. This was her decision. But I could see the lie in his face. I could see the careful calculation, the months of positioning, the slow campaign to become the favored son while I focused on keeping our mother alive. "You played a long game," I said quietly. Michael's expression hardened. "I protected our mother from having to worry about your future while she was dying. If you want to see that as manipulation, that's your choice. But the will stands." He got in his BMW and drove away, leaving me standing in a lawyer's parking lot with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and the knowledge that I'd been completely outmaneuvered by someone I trusted to grieve our mother alongside me rather than profit from her death. Before we go any further, let me know you're still invested in this story. Comment, "Still here?" or drop 100 points below so I know you're following along. What comes next is where everything changed, because what Mr. Hendricks found in Mom's papers would expose Michael's lies in ways even I couldn't have predicted. And just a heads up, the following events incorporate some dramatic storytelling elements for educational purposes. If that's not your style, feel free to click away now. But if you want to see exactly how justice played out in that courtroom, let's keep going. I should have contested the will immediately. Any reasonable person would have seen the red flags, the timing, the cruel language, the suspicious circumstances of its creation. But grief doesn't make you reasonable. Grief makes you exhausted and confused and willing to accept terrible explanations for impossible situations because fighting back requires energy you don't have. I spent 2 weeks living in Mom's house while Michael made arrangements to sell it. He was generous about the timeline, giving me 30 days to collect any personal items I wanted before the estate sale. His magnanimity felt like salt in a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. "Take whatever has sentimental value," he told me during one of his visits to assess the property for listing. "The furniture and household stuff will just go to auction anyway." I was packing Mom's books into boxes, trying to decide which ones held memories worth preserving. Her copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with notes in the margins from 30 years of teaching it. The mystery novels she'd loved, pages soft from rereading. The cookbook with handwritten modifications to recipes she'd perfected over decades. "Michael," I said, not looking up from the books, "did Mom ever say anything to you about feeling burdened by my care?" He paused in his assessment of the dining room furniture. "Sarah, why are you torturing yourself with this? She's gone. The will is what it is." "That's not what I asked." A longer pause. "Then, she worried about you, yes? She worried that you'd given up too much, that you'd blame her later for derailing your career. She wanted to protect you from that resentment." It was a good answer, plausible, even caring. But something about the way he delivered it felt rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for this conversation and had his talking points ready. "When did she first express these concerns?" I asked. "Sarah, I don't remember specific conversations. It was an ongoing thing over several months. Look, I know you're grieving, but picking apart every decision isn't going to change anything." He was right about that. But what I was feeling wasn't exactly grief anymore. It was something sharper, more focused. The feeling you get when you know something is wrong but can't yet prove it. That evening, I called Robert Hendricks. "Mr. Hendricks, this is Sarah Flynn. I wanted to ask you about the day my mother signed her will." "Of course. What would you like to know? How did she seem to you? Was she alert? Did she understand what she was signing?" A pause. "Miss Flynn, I have to be careful about attorney-client privilege, even after death. But I can tell you that I would never have allowed your mother to sign a document if I had any doubts about her mental capacity." "But how did she seem?" Another pause, longer this time. "She seemed tired, very tired. But she was able to answer my questions about the contents of the will and confirm that the distributions reflected her wishes." "What questions did you ask?" "Standard ones. Whether she understood she was disinheriting you completely, whether she was doing so of her own free will, whether anyone had pressured her into this decision." "And what did she say?" "She said yes, she understood. She said it was her decision. She said—" He stopped. "Mr. Hendricks. She said she was following Michael's advice, but that the final decision was hers." Following Michael's advice. There it was, the admission I'd been looking for. Michael had advised her to disinherit me completely. "Mr. Hendricks, when you drew up this will, did my mother provide the language about my motivations? The part about me being motivated by guilt rather than love?" The longest pause yet. Miss Flynn, those weren't your mother's words. Your brother provided that language. He said your mother had asked him to explain her reasoning, since she was having difficulty articulating her feelings. My heart stopped. Michael wrote the personal sections of the will? He provided the language for those sections, yes, with your mother's approval. Michael had written my mother's final judgment of me. He'd crafted the cruel assessment of my motivations and put it in her mouth, in her legal document, for posterity. And she'd been too sick, too confused, too trusting to question it. Mr. Hendricks, I need to contest this will. Miss Flynn, I have to advise you that will contests are expensive, time-consuming, and difficult to win. The bar for proving undue influence or diminished capacity is very high. But possible? Possible, yes, but you'd need evidence, documentation, witnesses to your mother's mental state, proof of improper influence, medical records showing her capacity was compromised. I hung up and sat in Mom's living room, in the chair where she'd spent her final months, and tried to figure out how to prove that my brother had systematically manipulated our dying mother into believing I was a selfish caregiver motivated by guilt rather than love. That's when I remembered the letters. Mom had always been a writer, not professionally but personally. She wrote thank you notes by hand, birthday cards with long personal messages, letters to the editor of the local newspaper about issues that mattered to her. During her illness, when talking became exhausting, she'd sometimes write down thoughts she wanted to share. I'd seen her writing during her final weeks. Small scraps of paper, notes she'd tuck into her purse or leave on the table beside her chair. I'd assumed they were reminders about medications or appointments, the kind of memory aids sick people use when their minds become unreliable. I started looking for them methodically, going through every drawer, every purse, every book where she might have tucked a note. In the kitchen junk drawer, I found grocery lists in her handwriting from before the cancer. In her bedroom, I found birthday cards she'd bought but never sent. In her purse, I found something else entirely. A small notebook, spiral-bound, the kind students use for quick notes. The cover was worn, the pages filled with Mom's handwriting in various stages of clarity. Some entries were neat and controlled, written on good days. Others were shaky, barely legible, written when pain or medication made coordination difficult. But they were all dated, and they told a story completely different from the one Michael had constructed. February 3rd. Sarah made vegetable soup today. She's been researching anti-inflammatory recipes, trying to find foods that won't upset my stomach. I don't know what I'd do without her patience with all this. February 15th. Michael visited. Says I should consider assisted living because Sarah can't provide proper medical care. I told him Sarah has been wonderful, but he seemed upset by this. Says I'm not seeing the burden I'm putting on her. February 23rd. Sarah up 3 times last night when I couldn't sleep. She's sleeping on the couch now so she can hear me if I need help. I feel guilty keeping her here, but I'm so scared of being alone with this. March 1st. Michael brought financial papers to review. Says we need to think about what happens to the house, about making things easier for everyone. I don't understand all the legal terms, but he says he'll handle everything so Sarah doesn't have to worry. March 8th. Terrible pain day. Sarah called the doctor, got my medications adjusted. Michael called tonight. Said he heard from Dr. Martinez that I'm getting worse faster than expected. Said I need to make decisions about my affairs while I still can. Don't remember Dr. Martinez saying that to Sarah. March 12th. Michael says Sarah told him she's worried about her job, her apartment, her future. Says she's starting to resent having to stay here but won't admit it. I asked Sarah about this. She looked confused. Said she's never talked to Michael about resentment. But Michael wouldn't lie about something like this. Would he? The final entry was dated March 14th, the day before she signed the will. Michael brought lawyer papers to sign. Says it's to protect Sarah from having to deal with estate complications while she's grieving. Says this way she can start fresh without being tied down by house and debts. I'm so confused by the medication, can't think clearly. Michael says this is what Sarah needs even if she doesn't realize it. I trust his judgment. He's always been the practical one. I sat on Mom's bedroom floor with the notebook in my hands and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not just from grief, but from rage. Michael had systematically isolated our mother from reality, feeding her false information about my feelings and fabricating concerns I'd never expressed. He'd created a fictional version of me, resentful, mercenary, temporarily caring, and slowly convinced our dying mother that this fiction was the truth. But I had proof now. In Mom's own handwriting, I had evidence of Michael's manipulation. The gradual campaign of lies, the false reports from Dr. Martinez, the invented conversations about my supposed resentment. And most importantly, her final entry showing she'd signed the will not because she believed I didn't deserve inheritance, but because Michael had convinced her it was somehow protective of me. I called my own lawyer the next morning. Attorney Patricia Webb specialized in estate litigation. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the focused intensity of someone who'd built a practice around fighting for people who'd been cheated out of their inheritance. Her office was small but organized, every surface covered with case files and law books. Will contests are uphill battles, she said after reviewing Mom's notebook and the timeline I'd constructed of Michael's visits and lies. But this is compelling evidence. Your mother's own words documenting a pattern of manipulation and misrepresentation. Is it enough? It's enough to file. Whether it's enough to win depends on what else we can find. I'll need medical records showing your mother's mental state, witness testimony about your brother's behavior, documentation of any financial irregularities. We spent the next 2 weeks building the case. Dr. Martinez provided records showing Mom's cognitive decline due to medication and disease progression. He confirmed that he'd never told Michael her condition was improving, never suggested I was providing inadequate care. The home health nurses provided statements about Michael's limited involvement and my comprehensive caregiving. But the breakthrough came when Patricia discovered something in the probate filing that had escaped everyone's notice. "Sarah," she called me on a Thursday afternoon, excitement clear in her voice. "I need you to come to my office immediately. I found something." I drove to her office in 15 minutes, speeding through downtown Millfield with a desperation that probably should have earned me a ticket. "Look at this," Patricia said, spreading documents across her desk. "Michael filed the estate inventory with the court yesterday. It's required within 90 days of probate opening. The inventory listed all of Mom's assets at the time of death. The house valued at $240,000. Savings accounts totaling $47,000. The life insurance policy $100,000. Investment accounts with $83,000. "Okay," I said. "That matches what I expected." "Look closer," Patricia said, pointing to a line item I'd missed. "There. Investment account at Morgan Stanley. Opened February 2023. Initial deposit $65,000. I stared at the document. "But that account is listed in the savings total too. It's counted twice." "Exactly. Which means either Michael made an error in the filing or—" She paused dramatically. "Or that account doesn't actually exist as a legitimate estate asset." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your brother may have moved $65,000 from your mother's savings into an investment account that he controlled, then listed both the original savings account balance and the new investment account as separate assets to make the estate appear larger than it actually is. Financial fraud. Not just manipulation, not just lies, but actual theft. Can you prove it?" "I've already subpoenaed the bank records. If that money was moved without proper authorization, if Michael used power of attorney to transfer your mother's assets to his own control before her death, then we have him on elder financial abuse in addition to undue influence." The case went to court 6 weeks later. Judge Maria Santos presiding, courtroom packed with curious locals who'd followed the story in the newspaper. Michael arrived with his own attorney, an expensive-looking man from Columbus who specialized in estate defense. Patricia presented our case methodically. Mom's notebook entries showing the pattern of lies. Medical testimony about her diminished capacity. Evidence of financial irregularities. Michael's lawyer argued that Mom had made a rational decision to reward the son who'd provided emotional support over the daughter who'd merely provided physical care. But the moment that changed everything came when Patricia called her final witness. "Your Honor, I call Robert Hendricks to the stand." Mr. Hendricks had agreed to testify under subpoena, despite his obvious discomfort with the situation. He took the stand reluctantly, swore the oath, and sat down with the careful posture of a man who knew he was about to reveal something damaging. "Mr. Hendricks," Patricia began, "you drafted the will in question, correct?" "Yes." "And who provided the language for the personal sections explaining Mrs. Flynn's reasons for disinheriting her daughter?" "Michael Flynn provided that language." "Did Mrs. Flynn review those sections before signing?" Pause. She was very tired that day. I read the provisions aloud, but I don't think she was following all the details. Mr. Hendricks, I'm going to ask you about something that happened after Mrs. Flynn's death. Did Michael Flynn contact you about any additional documents? Michael's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. Relevance. Goes to the witness's credibility and the defendant's state of mind, Your Honor. I'll allow it. Mr. Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. Yes. About a week after Mrs. Flynn passed, Michael called and asked whether there were any other documents. Any letters or papers his mother might have left that would need to be filed with the court. What did you tell him? I told him that all formal documents had been filed, but that if there were personal letters or instructions, they should be preserved as part of the estate record. And how did he respond? Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Hendricks looked directly at Michael, then back at Patricia. He asked specifically about any handwritten notes his mother might have made during her final weeks. He said the family wanted to make sure nothing important was overlooked. Did you find that request unusual? Yes, it seemed specific, as though he was looking for something particular rather than just being thorough. Patricia walked to the evidence table and picked up Mom's notebook. Mr. Hendricks, have you seen this notebook before? No. If you had found this during your representation of Mrs. Flynn, would it have changed your advice about the will? Michael's lawyer objected again, but Judge Santos overruled. Yes, Mr. Hendricks said quietly. If I had seen evidence that my client was being given false information about her daughter's feelings and motivations, I would have insisted on independent verification of her wishes before proceeding with the document. Patricia walked back to her table. No further questions. The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Santos looked at Michael, who had gone pale, then at the notebook in Patricia's hands. Mr. Flynn, she said, did you know about the existence of this notebook? Michael's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in his ear. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, Michael said. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the air conditioning humming, the clock ticking, the sound of 40 people holding their breath. Judge Santos stared at Michael for what felt like minutes. Then she spoke. Mr. Flynn, in 32 years on this bench, I have never seen a more clear-cut case of elder manipulation and financial abuse. The evidence presented shows a systematic campaign to isolate your mother from reality and manipulate her final testamentary wishes through fraud and undue influence. She turned to the stenographer. Let the record show that the will dated March 15, 2023, is hereby declared null and void. The previous will, dated 2018, which left Mrs. Flynn's estate equally divided between her two children, is reinstated as her valid final testament. Michael's expensive lawyer was already gathering his papers. His expression professionally neutral, but his hurry obvious. The performance was over, and his client had lost spectacularly. But Judge Santos wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court is referring the evidence of financial irregularities to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal charges related to elder financial abuse. Mr. Flynn, you are ordered to provide a full accounting of all financial transactions involving your mother's accounts for the 6 months prior to her death. Michael stood to leave, but the judge's voice stopped him. Mr. Flynn. He turned back. Your mother trusted you. Your sister trusted you. You violated that trust in pursuit of money that wasn't rightfully yours. That may not be illegal in every aspect, but it is reprehensible. She looked at me. Miss Flynn, I'm sorry for your loss and for the additional pain this contest has caused. Your mother's true will has been restored. The estate was settled 4 months later. The house, the savings, the life insurance, all of it divided equally as Mom had originally intended. Michael was ordered to return the $65,000 he'd transferred to his own account, plus interest and penalties. He was also responsible for all legal fees, both his own and mine. But more importantly, the district attorney filed charges. Elder financial abuse, fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Michael pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received 2 years probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record that ended his real estate career. I sold my half of the house to a young family with 2 small children. They painted the kitchen yellow and planted flowers in Mom's garden and sent me a photo of their kids riding bicycles in the driveway where I used to ride mine 30 years ago. With my inheritance, I started a nonprofit organization providing legal advocacy for families dealing with elder manipulation. We help people document abuse, connect with estate attorneys, and navigate the complex process of protecting aging relatives from predatory family members. Because that's the lesson I learned from losing my mother twice, once to cancer and once to my brother's lies. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling, and trust without verification isn't trust. It's naivety. Michael taught me something valuable, though he certainly didn't intend to. He taught me that the people who insist they're protecting your best interests are often the ones you need protection from. That manipulation works best when it masquerades as care. And that sometimes the person who claims to see the big picture is just positioning themselves to steal it. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever watched a family member be manipulated by someone who claimed to be helping, I want you to know something important. Documentation matters. Save everything. Write things down. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't prove it yet. Elder manipulation is more common than most people realize, and it's often perpetrated by the people closest to the victim. Adult children, trusted friends, caregivers who gradually assume control over someone's finances and decision-making. The warning signs are subtle but consistent. Isolation from other family members, sudden changes in financial arrangements or legal documents, explanations that don't quite add up, and the victim defending the manipulator even when the manipulation is obvious to others. If you recognize these patterns in your own family, please reach out for help. Contact your local elder abuse hotline, consult with an estate attorney, document everything you can. Don't wait until it's too late. And remember, grief makes us vulnerable, but it doesn't make us powerless. Sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to fight for the truth they would have wanted, not the fiction someone else constructed. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it helped you understand something about your own family dynamics, or if you think someone else needs to hear it, please share it. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another family reckoning story, because sometimes the most important battles happen around kitchen tables, not courtrooms. And remember, some people mistake kindness for weakness. Don't let them find out they're wrong when it's too late to matter.